Music from The Clash on the Richie Allen Show. Rock the Casbah. The time is coming up for 23 and a half minutes past the hour. Thanks for tuning in. Great to be with you as always. Busy old programme, so let's just crack on with it. Now, if you're in the UK, and of course we've got listeners around the world, you'll be aware of a series being run by Sky News at the moment called A New Climate: Science, Storms and Protests, the Issues Behind Climate Crisis. This is a new dawn for 24-hour news channels. It's very unusual. We've spoken about this before. Activist journalism on our television screens. And Sky has said, as the BBC has said very recently, that the debate is settled. There is no need to provide balance anymore. There isn't an argument. Man-made climate change, CO2 emissions are driving climate, and if we don't deal with it soon, it'll be catastrophic. And there are a number of stories in the press today about climate change, including artificial intelligence and how it might help offset climate change. And there are terrible stories about deforestation and the Amazon rainforest as well. But there are people with different opinions. There are people working in academia who have a different take on it. And it's strange that we don't hear or see these people on BBC, Sky or Channel 4. One of them is a professor in mathematics at Northumbria University, who also has a PhD in astrophysics, and published a really interesting paper which talks about the reduction of solar activity that is coming in the next 25, 30, 40 years, something known as the grand solar minimum, and how that might offset climate change. Let's welcome to the programme from Northumbria University, Professor Valentina Zharkova. Professor, thanks for coming on the programme. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Lovely to have you on. It is strange to me that somebody with your background and your unimpeachable credentials, I would say, is not showing up on Sky and the BBC this week when it's, wall-to-wall stories about climate change. Why is that? Why have you not been showing up on our TV screens this week to talk about the grand solar minimum?
Because I have a talk next week on the National Astronomy meeting, and we're preparing a press release on Monday about our new paper. So this will bring the question to the whole community.
Fantastic. So I might be jumping my guns maybe, and hopefully next week and the week after we'll see you. Is the science settled on carbon emissions being the chief primary cause for climate change, for exceptional weather events? Is it settled in your opinion?
No, it is not settled at all. Most of the leading scientists who do real research, they object this increase of the temperature made by the human technologies. We can name Akasofu, who was the director of Space Institution in Alaska. He published a paper in 2010 showing that the temperature increase is recovery from ice age, and it is baseline is slightly increasing, but large increase according to solar minimum, solar maximum. This is what has occurred, and this increase nowhere was related to any human-made effects. And our new paper actually says this increase indeed does exist, but the Earth had maybe in the last 100 to 120,000 years, we had about 60 such increases and decreases, and Earth happily survived as we are still here. So it is not settled, I had to say.
So we've had extreme changes in our climate that predate the Industrial Revolution. I find that interesting. I've read a little bit about this. I believe that at one time it was warm enough here, Professor, to grow grapes in Yorkshire.
Exactly.
Right.
The Romans, they grow grapes in Scotland, not even in Yorkshire.
It's extraordinary. So you believe there is an increase in temperature, but it is down to the fact that we are still emerging from the most recent ice age.
Yeah, this paper, which came this week and we press release will be next week, explaining why the temperature increasing, and this increase happened every 2,000 years. So this is the super grand cycle when the temperature slowly increasing and decreasing. So last minimum of this temperature was during the Mount minimum. Indeed, now the Earth recovering from this Mount minimum, slowly increasing the baseline temperature, but still temperature increases when you have solar activity in maximum and decreases when we have in minimum. So this happens normally on top of these baseline oscillations.
Now tell us about the Maunder minimum. You're obviously, and I don't mean in any way to patronize it, you're obviously very, very smart. I'm not, but I've been obviously reading as much as I could today, knowing that you were coming on, and thanks for coming on, by the way. What was the Maunder minimum? This is something that happened in the 17th century, was it?
Yes.
It was something to do with solar activity. Tell us what it was.
Yes, so we need to separate what is happening on the sun and what is happening on the Earth, because we are not the sun. So what is happening on the sun? It was this Maunder minimum and the upcoming grand minimum, which starts from next year, will last for another 33 years. So what is Maunder minimum? When you don't see, it happened in 1645 until 1715. So basically, there's no sunspots seen on the sun. It was really low activity for 6 solar cycles. And this definitely reduced irradiance which come to the Earth normally during the maximal solar activity, because we didn't have any maxima at that time. So much less irradiance came, and there's become much cooler. And the Thames was freezing, there was snow and everything. So this would happen in 17th century during the Maunder minimum. What we calculated in the paper, which was published in Nature Scientific Reports in 2015, we discovered that similar grand minimum is coming from 2020 to 2053. It is upon us, literally. We live in very historic time. And the temperature will be again decreased, but only for 3 cycles, not for 6 cycles like it was in Maunder minimum, but only for 3 cycles. And solar activity indeed now shows the signs of decrease. We have less sunspots, and this decrease will be increasing in the cycle 25, which we just entered, and especially cycle 26 in 11 years, which will be very, very low. Basically similar like it was in Maunder. So in this time, we will not have much irradiance and the temperature will be slightly reduced. So we don't know for how much. For example, for Maunder minimum, they calculated reduction of average temperature on the Earth was about 0.8 degree of Celsius. So maybe the decrease will be half of degree. It just rough guess. I didn't do this calculation, what I'm just guessing. But what is happening on the sun will go into the phase of hibernation, or this grand minimum, when there's no sunspot. So what will be consequences for the Earth and other planets? That we will not have, first of all, will not have enough solar radiance, but probably it is not the main factor. What we mostly do not have, we will not have strong magnetic field which shields the planets, including Earth, from cosmic rays. So we have a lot of cosmic rays will be coming to the Earth and other planets, which we know create the clouds and reduce the temperature. Plus, what we also will have when magnetic field of the sun decreased, probably activity on the planets, quakes, volcanoes, and so on. So we don't know. It was not investigated, but we will live through next 30 years. We will see what will happen. So this was response, how planets respond that the sun reduces its magnetic field, which in fact is very strong shield for all planets protecting us from the cosmic strangers, cosmic rays.
From cosmic rays.
This shield will disappear.
And this decrease in solar activity will mean a reduction in temperature on Earth, you believe. But I think, am I right in saying you've also speculated that it could be a very dangerous time for people?
Yes. It decreased the temperature. It is not simple like you will sit outside the temperature. You see in the Great Britain, we have June now, and I still periodically put heating on. So temperature definitely decreasing. There's no doubt about it. But we can put heating on if we have enough energy resources. If we have enough, remember when last year we had snow in March and for 2 weeks, people started putting heating, gas heating, electricity, and we completely used the capacity of our power stations that they needed to stop plants working because they couldn't provide enough energy to the people. So we were working on the limit of the capacity, and it was not even 3 weeks, it was only 2 weeks. So imagine if this would happen for a month or two. We were short in the energy resources. This is the first thing.
Well, one of the things the climate change proponents want to do is they want all of us to commit to keeping our homes heated at 19 degrees Celsius, which is going to be a big problem for senior citizens particularly. It's a problem for me, Professor. I'm 44 years old, but keeping my home at 19 degrees in the winter would be very difficult for me. So this is incredibly ironic. You think it's going to get really cold. They're saying it's going to get warm, but at the same time they're telling us, you know, we want you to commit to keeping your thermostat at 19 degrees. These are strange times for people. And my listeners will be listening to this and they'll be totally confused.
This is a complete hypocrisy from these guys who claiming that climate change come from overheating. Because if it is global warming, we should not have these spells of the very cold weather. You cannot say this is warming if temperature is freezing. So this is hypocrisy, or I don't know even how to call it. I don't want to be rude to call it, but this is not truth.
You can be rude if you want. This is an open forum
it's not
here.
My style. I don't want to. What I want to say that the temperature, if temperature decreased, I would never recommend anyone to put your temperature down and they get cold, they get flu, or they get pneumonia and die from the temperature, because you are not saving the environment. You need to save yourself and save basically your animals, your pets, and we will have problem, by the way, if the cold weather come. As I said, at least in the house, it is your choice. You can put heating on or out, but no one can heat what is outside. How wheat will be growing, how vegetables will be growing, how our animals will get any food if it is snow and wet.
So food shortages is a massive problem if you're right, and the decrease in solar activity causes a snap cooling period for 30 or 40 or 50 years. We're going to have a problem because in that climate, you can't grow the staples. And the staples are wheat. Right, okay. Can I ask you this? Let me just remind our listeners, Professor Valentina Zharkova is live on the line from Northumbria University. She has a PhD in astrophysics and is a professor in mathematics. So she's earned the right to speak. And I hope that when the paper is published in the coming weeks that we see the professor on BBC and Sky Television, because it's been one-way traffic.
Sky on the 27th of December 2017. It was the whole half an hour they were speaking about this global solar minimum. So there is a clip on Sky Television as well.
But the question is, right, because it seems like there's an agenda at the moment, at least the media seems to have an agenda. I was horrified as a journalist, as a historian, as a history graduate. I was disgusted to learn that the BBC has informed its producers not to find people like you, Valentina. You know, it's settled now. It's settled. There's no need to find any balance. So I'll be interested in the next couple of weeks to see the sky return to you, and I hope they do. Let me just ask you this, and remember now, you are speaking to a layman who hasn't a clue. So you've got to speak to me like you're talking to a child. Why are you so certain that the sun's solar activity will decrease? Give us the quick answer that I can share with other people and the mathematics behind that discovery. Why are you so certain it will decrease and we will enter that cooling period?
Because we applied the best method of eigenvalues. We found own oscillations of the sun from sun own magnetic field. So we run principal component analysis on the whole disk solar magnetic field data for the past 36 years. And we derived eigenvalues of the solar oscillations. And the top two ones produced these waves, two dynamo waves, which sun produced in two different layers, which are interacting with each other and producing the resulting wave, which seen as solar activity. And what we found, that these two waves are coming into, disruptive interference when the amplitude come into opposite signs. So one amplitude positive, another negative. So when the two waves meet, they obviously cancel each other, so amplitude nearly becomes zero. Is it simple?
Okay.
So it's very simple. So because of this happened during Maunder during the 66 years. What will be happening in this solar minimum will be only 33 years. But we see it from this wave interaction. So we did not wake up, look at the astrology, and say, all right, these stars are there and it should be minimum. No, we walked from the sun. Sun told us. And our paper was called Heartbeat of the Sun, because we managed to uncover real own oscillations of the sun. This is why I'm so confident, because this is the sun. It's shown us what it has.
It's analysing the past and taking that mathematical equation, looking at what's happening now, and
yes, exactly. And when we looked to prove that this is the correct, we look backwards. It confirmed the grand minimum Wolfa, grand minimum Homer during the Roman Empire, and other grand minimum. When you look backwards, they were there. We simply didn't realize that they're occurring every 350, 400 years.
You must not be the only academic who knows this.
Yes, there are quite a few of us.
There are a few,
trying to combine the efforts and produce the conference which will inform the world that actually all the African countries, they take our word much more seriously than middle latitude countries. So they're building all these factories producing vegetables and everything, and they're planning to make big business from this grand minimum on European and North Americans and others, because they do understand this is not in our control. We can't control the sun. It happens over there.
Hang on a second, Professor. I'd like you to repeat that. Did you just say to me that in Africa they understand the grand minimum solar activity? They understand this is going to happen and they're preparing for it?
Yes, because they had first time last year, they had first snow in 140 years, and they had frost this year again. Al Jazeera was most active interviewer of myself. They know this is happening, so they decided, okay, we cannot do anything about it. Let's embrace it and make money out of it. Very smart people, I have to say.
The question must be asked. Surely governments must know or must be aware of your theory, your thesis that the cooling period is coming. Why, if they do know of it or if they are aware of it, why are they going full scale for global warming? Why are they buying into the global warming idea, which seems to be preposterous?
People who got funding for global warming, it's overwhelming funding. They got 26 postdocs in British Meteor Office in Reading against 23 postdoc which STFC Council gives for the whole astrophysics for the whole country. So these people, they try to suppress anything because their sort of funding will disappear. We done this, everything out of curiosity. We didn't get a pence of money apart from people donations. But these people, they put a lot of funding, and what it comes up that they resulted with nothing. So this is why they're suppressing all those other people until the cold will come and the sun completely stop producing sunspot, and they cannot say it is not true.
They won't be able, at that stage, they won't be able to deny it. Now, you said that you've had donations. I've got to ask you, have any of those donations come from big oil and gas at all?
No, it was actually people. One person from Luton and some normal people who read and understand normal language. I try to express even in my papers because I write them for Nature. I know they will be read by general public. So I try to make the language understandable so people can understand the topic I'm discussing and the results which come out of it. So the people definitely understood what was discussed.
There's a lot of interest in our conversation on Twitter. We've got the professor for another 5 or 10 minutes max. It's great to have you on the programme today, by the way. Thanks for coming on. John is in Salford, and John says, why do we think the Chinese are buying vast swathes of land in Africa? It's because the Chinese know about the grand solar minimum. Is that right?
Yes. Why I know this? Because people from different parts of the world then somehow see me at the center of the information, honest person. They inform me about all these events, and they suggested to organize the conference, not me. They suggested because they're really overwhelmed what is happening, and someone is doing something while the West governments, they close their eyes. I don't see anything. I'm in denial. I don't see anything. They abuse those people coming on the strike sitting on the roads. I said, you would better tell your people, go and learn astronomy, because it will be laughable stock next week when they discover that the increase of the temperature will be lasting for another 600 years, and temperature increase will be by more higher than it is, and Earth. So temperatures will continue to rise for the next 6 centuries, but during that period, we will have periods of cooling which could last for 2 or 3 decades, as you've talked about earlier on, because I want to go back to that. This is incredible. This is the Maunder minimum. Back in the 17th century, folks, the Thames froze over. We had a little ice age, and it's not just happened that one time. It's happened on other occasions as well, predating the Industrial Revolution. Professor Zharkova has looked at that data over the centuries, has done the mathematical equations, and has determined that in the next 25, 30, 40 years, we are going to have another little ice age, a cold snap, contrary to what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is saying, which is that we better transform our lives today, because 1.5 degrees temperature rise is going to cause catastrophe in the next 40, 50 years. You know, I spoke yesterday about this terrible situation. I'm sure you're aware of it. In Wales, there is a village called Fairborn, which is on the coast, Professor. And they've told the people in Fairborn that they're going to decommission the town there. And that in the next 25 years, everybody's going to have to leave that town and demolish their houses, just in case there is a half a metre rise
in sea level, which might breach the wall. It's absolutely dreadful. And the villagers there are saying, well, hang on a second, why don't you wait for 10 years and then see, and then decide to decommission the town? Why are you making the decision now?
That's wise words.
Yeah.
Because absolutely wise. Wait for 10 years and see what happens. And happen completely opposite, they say. But if they move, it will be a good chance for them to sue this commission and idiotic governments for the false information they provided to the citizens. Because it's incredible. I just cannot believe that they come to this extent of the absolutely, I would say, idiocracy.
Let me ask you this. I've got to ask you this.
Excuse my language.
No, look, I understand. I should really do my job. It's difficult for me to do my job here because I have sympathy with your argument. And I'm not sponsored by big oil or gas either. I've done my own reading. I used to be an academic, and I've done my own research and reading, and I don't believe that CO2 is driving climate. And one of the main reasons I don't believe that is because the IPCC climate models don't even mention solar activity, which to me, even if I was Forrest Gump, if I was the dumbest man in the world, it just makes no sense to me. And I worry about this. A number of listeners have asked us to confirm that the Chinese are interested in Africa because the Africans understand the grand solar minimum. They're already planning for it. And the reason the Chinese are interested is because there will be investment opportunities there for them.
Absolutely.
That's right. Okay. Now, here's the question I wanted to ask you. Look, forget Greta Thunberg. God love Greta Thunberg and the people behind her. Mm-hmm. There are hundreds and hundreds of men and women that my listeners see every week on the BBC, on Channel 4, on Sky News. All of these men and women, not all of them now, but some of them, many of them are from academia like yourself, and they have stellar educations like your good self. And my listeners will say, I'm glad you brought Valentina on, Richie, but why should we believe her? There are hundreds of people this week on Sky News talking, saying it's inevitable. Massive sea level rise coming, melting of the glaciers. It's happening, and it'll be a tragedy if we don't do anything about it, because the future generations will have no world left. So why should we not believe them and believe Professor Valentina? Why? That's what they'll say, some of them. I've got to say that. Some of my listeners will say this. They say, you've not given her a hard time, Richie. Which
because you compare how people do mathematics. And when you go to the methods, you would understand the method I do is a solid, rigid method. The method they apply to predict the temperature, exposed by Professor Co2 in his paper 2010, which shown they extrapolate the temperature, which has kind of a Doppler distribution with some bump. They extrapolate it on the ascending phase straightforward with linear interpolation and get increased 3-4 degrees, while in reality the temperature goes like to sine to the max and start decreasing, and they do not take this into account. So after that, how can you believe whatever they do? And there were other things which come in. I wouldn't mention, but there is a research about CO2 and water by Professor Selby from Imperial College. He is the temperature person on the Earth. I'm solar physicist, solar terrestrial physicist. I got into this discussion because they tried to suppress my research. Like if there is no something happening on the sun, it will not happen on the Earth. Only because of this, I started learning what people doing. And I discovered that there is no even measurable increase of carbon dioxide. We cannot measure, we can separate which is come from the natural resources, it come from the human, because the amount is so tiny. There is no instrument which could securely measure. So the error bars of the measurements are much higher than whatever they measure.
No,
I think the proof that if the method is wrong, and if the error bar of measurements are higher than itself, the measurement, it means that you cannot trust these measurements. This is the basic classical statistics.
Yeah, you mentioned my pronunciation is terrible. Professor Arkusofu, that's right, from 2010. I remember covering that story at the time.
Oh, you remember it?
Yeah,
Okay.
I remember covering it at the time. I was making radio programs in Spain. There's a lot of tweets coming in here, an enormous amount of tweets. Let me just...
What is good? Our new paper, which is coming next week, actually proves Akasofu was right. And the reason of this is not related to the sun, related to the motion of the solar system.
But you said something, I can't wait to see this paper, by the way.
Okay.
You said something very interesting a second ago, that the amount of carbon dioxide created by human beings is negligible when it's compared to the carbon dioxide produced in nature. Now, that's interesting because I remember listening to a lecture given by Professor Ian Plimer, a very respectable geologist whom I know you know all about, Professor Ian Plimer. And he gave a brilliant lecture to Parliament back in 2009. And he said the same thing. He said that we've been sequestering carbon dioxide in the sea for millennia in the rocks, and it's been coming out of volcanoes. You know, we can't even quantify the volcanoes on the seabed. So the CO2 that we're making is basically irrelevant, is it? It's irrelevant.
Absolutely. Carbon dioxide, this is the food for our trees. They all live on it. So the trees, the forest consume it. It is not happening what they say. It is, I just amazed how they managed to brainwash so many people around to accept this so-called voodoo science as a real science.
Voodoo science. What is there something more sinister going on? I ask you that because their solutions are terrible solutions for humanity. They're very draconian. They're very fascistic, I would say. You know, they want us all to have smart fridges so that they can spy on what we eat. They want to tell us we can't travel. It sounds very controlling, the solutions. And I wonder, is that part of some agenda somewhere? I'm very conspiratorial, Professor, now, but what do you think of that? The solutions are very controlling and very worrying, very big brother, I would have said.
I don't know.
You don't know?
As I said, I'm pure scientist. I never thought even about consequences when we published our first paper. I thought we discovered something on the sun, which is very interesting for the humankind. And I didn't realize this huge response, especially from the climatologists who were trying to suppress anything we do.
Trying to shut you down.
Trying to suppress even publications of our papers and so on. And then I discovered there were so many people who invested into these lousy models. It is like in the last century, 17th century, it was the model of our planet that the Earth was center of the planet and sun rotates around the Earth. It's Ptolemy model. And then at the same, close to the Mount Minimum, Copernicus appeared and he discovered, no, the sun is at the center of the solar system and planets rotate around it. And it took about 20, if not 50 years until the whole community accepted it, because Inquisition basically suppressed those people who believe how it is heretics. How could a sun not rotate around the Earth? We see it rotates on the sky. It cannot be, because it means that we are not the main thing in the universe. Yes, we are not. We are simple dust. We're a simple planet. And there are now many exoplanets somewhere in the world. So this is what I'm saying, that the change of concept and change of perception, it's a lengthy process. So I can't say I would strongly disappointed. It took, when we published our paper, it's only 4 years ago. So we have a long way to go. And I have, unlike Copernicus, I have very good support from the sun, because we're approaching, literally, we're walking into grand solar minimum and we'll watch it from the front seat, each of us.
Final question for you. Thanks for your time today, Professor. Professor Valentina Zharkova is live on the line from Northumbria University.
You're welcome.
No, it's good to have you on. And the suppression that you've been putting up with and the attempts by people to stop your work from reaching people. I just want to ask you this. I don't want to end negatively, but you've got to be careful, don't you, about your own position in academia, because there will be those who... I get worried that people are starting to talk about climate denial, and that sounds very dangerous. That it's almost like some people want to make it taboo to talk about climate change or to deny man-made climate change. So are you worried about academia? Are you worried about your own career or professors who might, share your aspirations, that they might need to be careful about their jobs? Again, I don't want to be negative, but I've got to ask that question.
Yes, I'm worried about my colleagues. My collaborator from Moscow, Elena Popova, was struggling actually in Moscow. The colleagues who were supporting this idiotic global warming and stochastic sun. So instead of waste we produced in the sun regularly, they say the sun produces like stochastic heartbeat. And I said, it cannot happen. And so anyway, her life is very difficult in there. She changed 2 places of work because people become very jealous. When she got a press release, people become very jealous. In Northumbria University, they're more or less supportive. I wouldn't say we don't have many people who support global warming. I better not to speak to them because they become very agitated. So if I avoid them, I can survive. No one suppresses me because I publish these papers. To the contrary, the university is proud that I'm publishing them, so
Great.
It's not so bad.
That's marvelous. No, it is. It's marvelous to hear that you've got the support of the university. I mean, science should be free, and it should be free of obviously suppression and censorship. There should be no censorship. You've earned your degrees and your PhD in astrophysics and your degrees in mathematics and astronomy. You've earned those. So you've earned the right to put forward your thesis and your papers and your work without having to worry about other people trying to get you fired. So I want to thank you for coming on today, Professor. Thanks. I'm sure we'll talk about this again in the very near future, with your permission. And I wish you all the best with the publication of the paper. And I hope I'm watching you on national television next week. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you. Paper is published. We only publish the press release soon, so it's fine. Thank you.
Marvellous. Thanks for that. Bye for now. That was Professor Valentina Zharkova, who's got a PhD in astrophysics, and she's got a master's in applied mathematics and is a professor of mathematics at Northumbria University. And she believes that she can prove that in the coming decades we are going to see a serious reduction of solar activity, which will bring about a cooling of the planet for a short time, at least in terms of history anyway, for a few decades, like the Maunder minimum of the 17th century. And her work has been peer-reviewed and has been signed off by mathematicians around the world and other academics. But it has to be said that the climate science people have attacked her with vigour over the last couple of years and tried to pull apart the work that she's done.